It was in the middle of August, and the harsh wind blew hot and humid, kicking up a storm for the evening hours. Off to the north, the black clouds had started to brew and roll. It was about 6:30 p.m. and my date was late. He would not tell me where he planned to take me. It was a surprise. Now, being 30 minutes late, I began to wonder what could possibly be going on, if I would be going anywhere. I walked out into the open front porch and could almost smell the rain coming. It began to grow darker. I decided if he arrived, he would just stay at my house until the storm passed. I then started to worry that he may be riding his motorcycle. Motorcycles and thunderstorms do not mix. He knew I despised motorcycles, but well, hopefully he would be in his truck. As the dreaded motorcycle came around the corner, the rain began to spit big fat drops. He got off the bike and indicated we needed to hurry up. I told him I was not going, it was raining, and I was not getting on the bike, and I wouldn't even if it was not raining. After he became increasingly more angry with me and refused to stay at my house until the storm passed, he got on the motorcycle and started off down the direction. In the downpour, I looked up all I could to see was the flashing lights and blue lights, such as those things coming off of an emergency vehicle. I watched for a few minutes, thinking there must have been an accident right in front of my house. I could hear screams of agony, sounding as if they were coming from a few feet in front of me. No one was there. I turned to grab my iced tea I had brought onto the porch with me. As I turned back, the lights were all gone. There was no evidence of an accident either. I shook my head and turned to go into the house. As I turned, I could hear the unmistakable roar of his motorcycle starting, and then screeching tires. I whirled around and nothing was there. I turned back around for a few moments and decided I would sit on the porch for a while. Surely that he had gotten to me, causing me to see and hear things. About 20 minutes later, my mom called me at the screen door telling me that I had a call. I asked who it was from, and my mom was familiar with most of my friends. She stated she didn't recognize the voice. I went and answered the phone. The voice on the other end of the line clarified my name and asked me if I was related to Mark, my would-be date from earlier. I told him I was not related, that we had been dating for a few weeks. I was then informed that he had my name and phone number on his back pocket, so I was the first person they called. Mark had been in an accident on his motorcycle. The roads were wet and slick. He skidded out of control and came to a rest on a couple of those sand barrels that used to be used for street barriers. As the accident was being described to me by phone, I looked up and saw flashing red lights down on the thing again. I heard the screech of tires. I closed my eyes tightly and said a silent prayer. As I opened my eyes, again the lights and screeching sounds were gone. I was told to contact his parents and come to the hospital. They would not release his condition to me over the phone. I told my mom and she drove me to his parents' home and I told them of the call. We all went to the hospital together. By the time we arrived at the hospital, Mark's left leg had been put into a cast all the way up to his hip. His scrapes and cuts had been cleaned on his arms and his face, and he was arguing that he did not need to have a cervical collar on. Mark ended up staying in the hospital overnight for observation, but eventually recovered completely. We did not continue to date after that night because I stated I jinxed him. About 3 years later, he had another accident on a motorcycle, which ended up breaking his back and his pelvis, causing him to give up motorcycles for good. I was 13 years old when this happened. Around that time, my mom began leaving me at home alone a few nights a week for a couple of hours at a time to teach an agility class. That particular night, she left for her class at around 7:30, and soon after it started pouring rain. This didn't really bother me, as I've always found the rain to be peaceful. I came downstairs out of my room to watch something on television. Now, the television in our living room sits in front of 2 windows which look out to our front yard. Our front yard is partially covered by small forest that separates our house from the neighbor's house. The center of our yard slopes downwards and then again back up. So when it rains, it creates a river flowing across the yard and about half a foot deep. Since it was pouring rain, the yard flooded fairly quickly. While I was watching television, the power was knocked out due to the storm. I didn't have much else to do besides sit in the dark and wait for it to come back on. Just then, lightning flashed and I noticed a movement between the trees in my front yard. Who the hell would be outside in the rain like this? I decided to go peek out the window. I couldn't see very well because it was so dark out and because we had screen in our windows. But I thought I could make out a figure standing between the trees and my house. The lightning flashed again and that removed all doubt. There was definitely someone there. My heart started beating so fast as this person was standing only about 20 feet from my front door in the pouring rain, staring at my house. The figure stepped out of the forest and directly into the river, flowing through my yard. Then they placed their hands in the pockets of their hoodies. I couldn't see their face at all as they had pulled their hoodie down. I backed away from the window, scared. I felt like I shouldn't be scared because I know it's quite hard to see into my house from outside, but somehow I felt he knew I was there. Curiosity got the better of me and I pulled the curtain aside and peeked out again. Just then, the person pulled out one hand of their pocket and raised it, in a waving motion, and then placed it back in their pocket. I flipped out. I ran to find my crappy little Nokia phone to call my mom. I dialed desperately and she didn't answer the voicemail. I looked at the time and saw her class had about 5 minutes left. I kept dialing and redialing, praying that she'd answer. She didn't pick up. I kept peeking out the window every few seconds until I realized that they had moved a few steps closer. Then, the power came back on and the lights on our porch flickered on. As this happened, the person hesitated for a second, before turning around and bolting in the opposite direction. About 15 minutes later, my mom arrived back home. When I heard the back door open, I raced to the kitchen and hugged her and started crying, asking her why she didn't pick up her phone. She said her phone had died on the way to class. I told her what happened, and although she tried not to show it, I know she was legitimately freaked out. She told me to go to bed and that she would take care of it. I didn't sleep that night or several nights after that. She never did tell me what she did do to take care of it. I stopped asking after a while, but whoever they were, they haven't been back. I'm almost 30 years old, and my story takes place about 9 years ago or so. And I don't remember exactly. I remember an old friend of mine and I had been talking about paranormal things that we believed in. How many people we knew believed, and that sort of thing. We had been sitting at this house and got restless, so we decided to take a drive in his car. It was a very cloudy night and they were calling for heavy amounts of rain. It was probably about 7 or 8 p.m. by this time. We get maybe 30 minutes from his house and the rain starts pouring. We had been just making small talk and listening to the radio up to this point. A short while we round a curve and to my right is a giant open field, and about that time a bright stream of lightning lit up the sky over this field and I happened to look over, and I see not one, but many, what I believe are spirits of some sort standing in this field. Some are doing everyday type things. Some were just standing there while others were walking around looking lost. One thing I noticed is that while we were driving past, every single one of these spirits stopped and stared directly at me as we drove by. I thought maybe after we had driven, and I looked back, I would have found that it was just my imagination. But as I looked back and the sky lit up again, I could still see them there, just no longer focusing on me. I also remember that night after I got home rather shaken and definitely afraid. I was having a dream about something attacking me. It was an evil presence, I remember that, and I can remember it bit me in my dream. And about that time I woke up. I felt the pain on my arm and not in my dream. I looked down and there were bite marks on my arm, or this presence had bitten me. I am still not sure what to make of these experiences. The bite was not caused by an animal, as my dad would not allow me to have pets, and all the doors and windows were closed. Just curious as to what everyone's ideas may be on this. When I was younger, back in the mid-70s, my husband and I lived in an apartment complex. We were fairly well acquainted with the couple who lived above us. They were an attractive couple, but their relationship had been a volatile one to say the least. They fought constantly over any and everything, and from time to time, they had been known to take shots at each other with a snub-nosed .38 pistol the man owned. One night, what I feared for months happened. They got into one of their heated arguments, but this time, it ended with the woman shooting the man to death with his own gun. The man fell to his death on my porch, right in front of my front door. No charges were brought against her after the woman pleaded self-defense. Less than a week after the man's death, she began to behave irrationally. She became jittery and claimed to have seen the man in her bedroom on more than a few occasions. Once she said she saw him climbing up the wall beside her bedroom window. Less than 2 months later, the woman packed up and moved hastily out of the apartment, and no one ever saw her again. Then, one night about 6 months ago after the man had gotten killed, my husband and I were entertaining friends. Among them had been my husband's uncle, who had legally blind since his early teens. It was late summer, and as will happen in summer, a fierce thunderstorm struck, with plenty of lightning, high winds, and blowing rain. The storm lasted for well over 20 minutes. However, the festive mood left with the storm and everyone prepared to leave for home. My husband and I walked to the door with our guests. I was the first one to reach the door, only to find that something was blocking the screen door. But I couldn't see anything that could have been responsible for it. After pushing it hard a few times, the door finally opened and I stepped out into the rain-drenched porch and saw that something was wrong. Even though the entire porch was soaked, the spot in front of my door was bone dry, and was even more eerie was the fact that the dry spot was in the shape of a human being, from the shape of the head down to the feet, and it was lying in the exact same position my neighbor had fallen in when his wife shot him. No one wanted to believe it, even though several people witnessed this weird sight. To validate it for myself, my husband's uncle leaned down and felt the long dry spot with his hand, and it left him speechless. We moved out of that apartment several months later, but until we did, occurrences like that kept happening in the apartment. When I was 23, I'm 26 now, my girlfriend and I were living in an apartment building in Phoenix. Our downstairs neighbor clearly had some mental issues going on. He was probably in his 60s, super skinny, always wore really tight tank tops and short shorts around. This is not the mental issues part. The apartments were built in the 70s. Obviously, they had been renovated since then. Instead of the horizontal blinds, they had vertical shitty ones now. No more carpet, updated appliances, you know what the renovations are. But his apartment hadn't been. It was exactly the same. Only his in the entire complex. I only know because he usually had his blinds open, and I had to walk by his place to get to the stairs. He would always yell and bang things around in his apartment, and when it rained, he would go up on the roof. We had a patio roof thing, not an actual roof, and just scream. I mean, yell at the sky. And when he wasn't yelling at the sky, he was yelling, "Dang it," in his apartment, over and over. And he would come outside and pace around mumbling to himself when it was raining. Now the creepy part. I was into photography at the time. And it was raining and lightning, so my girlfriend, my friend Chris, and his girlfriend went on the roof with me to try to get some shots of the lightning. Of course, Wildman, as we called him, was on the 4th floor on his way up to the open area of the roof. He asked us what we were doing. This was the first interaction I've ever had with this guy. Even though I saw him all the time, I told him that we were trying to take a few pictures of the lightning. Why the hell would you want to do that? That's stupid. So we just said, okay, dude, and went on our way. He followed us over to the roof. So we said, fuck it, we're leaving. We walked over to the elevator and he followed us again. We got in the elevator and he just stood outside of it, looking at us. I put my girlfriend behind me and Chris did the same. I didn't know what this guy was about to do. He just stood there. The doors closed and we all kind of chuckled inside out of relief. Then, like a horror movie, the doors opened again. I guess he pushed open the button, and Wildman was standing there. He told us to go away and I told him that's what we're trying to do. The doors closed again and the elevator went down. We all went back to my apartment and were considerably freaked out.